Today is Veterans Day. Today we honor those that have served and continue to serve. CMC has a long history of commissioning officers, educating veterans, and supporting our men and women in uniform. CMC is the host college for the Golden Lion Battalion, which enrolls students from CMC and 15 other institutions, graduating and commissioning dozens of officers every year. The Claremont McKenna College Reserve Officers Training Corps is one of the oldest in the nation, celebrating its 94th anniversary this year. Military training began in 1916 at Pomona College, the original host institution. An infantry ROTC unit was officially authorized by the War Department in January of 1919. In 1949, the unit became co-hosted by Pomona College and Claremont Men's College. And in 1953, the curriculum was changed from infantry to general military science. CMC assumed full support of the ROTC program in 1995. The battalion has commissioned more than 5,000 Army second lieutenants since its founding. I'd like to give a warm welcome to President Emeritus Jack Stark, a graduate of the ROTC program, and alumnus Mustafa Mirza, who together created the Mirza Stark Scholarship for Veterans and Children of Veterans. If anyone has any questions about that, we're happy to talk offline. Thank you both for your support of CMC and our veteran community. In addition to our panelists, which we will introduce shortly, we're joined by the new commander of CMC's ROTC program, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to him today and to ask him for some remarks. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Hayden is the professor and chair of our military science department and a U.S. Army engineer officer who has served in a variety of command and staff positions, from platoon leader to battalion executive officer. He completed 5 combat deployments throughout his career, having served twice in Iraq and 3 times in Afghanistan, with duties ranging from facilities engineer to battalion operations officer. Originally from Fall River, Massachusetts, he received his commission through the ROTC program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the degree in political science. He also holds a Master's of Science degree in Geology and Geophysics from the University of Missouri at Rolla, and a Master of Military Art and Science in military history from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. His awards and decorations include 3 Bronze Star medals, 4 Meritorious Service medals, 3 Army Commendation medals, 2 Army Achievement medals, the Combat Action Badge, and the Sapper Tab. I'd be remiss to leave out that we have some of your predecessors on the call today, including Lieutenant Colonel Mike Doyle and Lieutenant Colonel retired Kevin Arnold. Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, welcome to CMC. I turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Evan. I appreciate it. That was a great introduction. Mike Doyle, I hope you like what I've done with the office. Little more engineer red in this office than maybe the way you left it. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Friends, family, fellow veterans, service members, past and present, good afternoon. I am, as Evan said, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Hayden. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce myself and discuss what this day means to me. As I said, I'm a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. I'm extremely proud to have the opportunity to stand before you today as the professor of military science here at Claremont McKenna College. This is the very same program that commissioned my wife into the Army, which immediately sent her to Fort Lewis, then Iraq, and then back to Fort Lewis, which is where we met and started our lives together. Prior to meeting my wife, I had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 3 times and then matched that number since. In fact, I just recently returned from Afghanistan last June on the day of our anniversary. As there is no rest for the weary, we immediately packed up our house in Northwest Indiana and drove to California to begin our assignment here in Claremont. And despite COVID, I sent a picture to Mike Doyle. The day after we arrived to the area, I came down here, took my picture from the door. I just couldn't wait to get started. As November is the month of the military family, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about my family. We have 4 incredible children. Abigail and Bridget are twins who were born in Bethesda, Maryland. Hannah was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, and Billy was born at West Point, New York. To give you a sense of the dynamic nature of our lives, Abby and Bridget are 9 years old. They've had 8 different addresses through 6 different states across 4 different time zones. Such is the life of a military child in the military family. Now I'd like to shift gears and briefly talk about Veterans Day and service to our nation and to each other. As we recall this day, 102 years ago, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1908, an armistice was declared between the Allied nations and Germany in the First World War, the Great War. As we all know, in the aftermath of World War II and the Korean War, Armistice Day became Veterans Day. And so today we celebrate and honor the service and sacrifice of so many in our country's long history. to wrap this up, I am the son, the brother, the cousin, the nephew, and husband of a veteran. But unlike my kids, I didn't grow up in the military. I didn't grow up surrounded by the military. But I was the son of a career postal worker and a pediatric nurse. And whether we knew it or not, we were surrounded by service. It's in my family's DNA to serve others. And that's why I'm incredibly excited and honored to serve here on the faculty at Claremont McKenna College, a place in which service and leadership, responsible leadership, is baked into everything we do. So I thank you for your time. Evan, thanks for inviting me to make some remarks. I certainly appreciate it. I look forward to our discussion this afternoon. I look forward to connecting with you all in my years to come here at CMC. Thanks.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Hayden. Thank you for your service, and thank you to everyone who has served or is currently serving or who will serve on this call today. It's now my pleasure to welcome 3 young alumni currently serving in the U.S. Army. First, we have Lindsay Burton, class of 19, First Lieutenant, Logistics. We have Hunter Ashburn, goes by Ash, class of 17, First Lieutenant, Armor. And John Marshall, class of 2016, was First Lieutenant and is now Captain, congratulations, Engineers. Thank you all for your service and for your time today. To start, please tell us why you selected to enter the ROTC program, your major at CMC, and a little bit about your current duties. And we'll start with Captain Marshall.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I had always knew that I was interested in the military. I wanted to be a leader in the military, but I also wanted to go to college. And CMC, when I first visited there, just the leadership aspect and the service aspect really stood out to me. And I knew that was the place I wanted to go. So I applied for ROTC. They offered to pay for my time at Claremont McKenna. So it was really the perfect fit of the Army leadership and then the civilian leadership and mentorship and growth that I received at CMC. So thank you.
And John, what was your major at CMC?
Oh, yes, I forgot. I was a government major.
And what are some of your primary duties now in your current role?
Right now, I'm the company executive officer at a recruiting company on Long Island. So I manage 40 recruiters across 5 recruiting stations from Eastern Long Island to Western Long Island, right up against New York City, making sure that they have all the materials and equipment and training that they need to put the next generation of soldiers into the Army.
Thank you. We'll go to Ash next.
Hey, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone, because I think we have people in all 3 time zones right now. I'm Lieutenant Ashburn, just Ash, class of 17. So why did I join ROTC? About the age of 10, I got it into my mind that I was going to be a fighter pilot, and I labored for the next 7 years under that delusion until I realized that I hated flying. But I found CMC. First, actually, and all they had was Army ROTC. They didn't have Air Force. And so the jump was really natural. I fell in love with CMC, and looking back, I have absolutely no hesitation. The Army was absolutely up my alley, leading soldiers, getting ready for the fight. That's what it's all about. Back at CMC, I was a government and German dual major. I'm not posted to Germany. That's not that the Army cares. That's just happenstance and good luck. And I'm currently serving as an executive officer for a scout cavalry troop. I just got off the line this summer, gave up my scout platoon, which was really hard to do, but it was time for the next step. So now I'm currently serving as an XO, and I'll actually be moving back to Fort Benning, Georgia on December 8th to go attend the Captain's Career Course and take after John, pick up my second bar in a bit.
Great, welcome, Ash. Lindsay.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, or aloha from Hawaii. So I'm Lieutenant Lindsay Burton, class of 2019. And the reason why I joined ROTC is a little bit different than my other 2 co-panelists. So I'm the first in my family to attend college, and we were touring colleges when I was a senior in high school. And we were at one college, actually not CMC at the time, that had an ROTC program, and I had never heard of ROTC before. I don't have anyone in my family who's prior service. aside from my grandfather who had served in the Navy previously. And, you know, I always felt drawn to public service. I knew that I wanted to go major in government. I knew that I wanted a life of public service. And so doing that research into ROTC and realizing that that was a scholarship program that exists for myself, I took that up, and it was a great decision. I loved every step of the way of it. So currently right now, I am a maintenance platoon leader and maintenance control officer out of an aviation support battalion for the 25th Infantry Division. So aside from also being a regular platoon leader and kind of having all of those awesome duties of leading 41 soldiers, I also work heavily in parts procurement, material procurement for an entire battalion fleet. So that's what I'm up to these days.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. Lindsay, did you say you're major at CMC?
Yes, sorry, thank you for that one. I was also a double major at CMC in government and Middle Eastern studies.
Great, thanks. Certainly, we all have government in common, so welcome everyone, but everyone did a little bit of a different take on their education. So as we reflect on our experience at CMC, ROTC cadets have really two different experiences. How did your CMC experience prepare you for military service? And it's open to anybody.
I can go first. So I think CMC is very good at putting people outside of their comfort zone and requiring them to interact with each other. So like freshmen go on a WOA trip, everyone takes a political philosophy class or some kind of debate class. And most of the classes are really discussion based where people naturally disagree with each other. And that creates kind of an ability to communicate with people that think different than you. And another thing that's really great about CMC is that there's very few, if any, bystanders at CMC. You're always encouraged to get involved and to be a member of the community. And that kind of relates to being a military leader because there's no such thing as a bystander as a military leader. You know, as a leader, you've been recognized and given an appropriate rank to carry out duties and responsibilities. And whether you're directly in charge of someone, you still hold that rank and you're still recognized as a leader and someone's always watching you as a leader. So CMC really allowed me to learn how to get involved in communities and create communities. And that's really greatly helped me as an officer.
I can jump in next. So kind of similar, but the biggest thing that CMC was about to me was building relationships. And the Army, just like any other organization, is built on people. The ability to reach out across organizations, find outside help, whether that's in a staff meeting, going to your peers, but being able to create a group of efficient people to get the job done, like that's what it's about. So I think CMC really goes hard with forcing, like John said, forcing students to engage, to learn how to deal with other people, and to build those long-term relationships more than just the passing, hey, good to see you.
So for me, it was really the interdisciplinary learning kind of that came out of a CMC education that caused me, and I'm sure my other co-panelists here, to look at problems that we were facing on the daily as officers, to think outside of the box, to break out of silos, and kind of work hard to find solutions that maybe weren't necessarily what has been seen previously, what was necessarily always a textbook answer, but was getting after the mission and taking care of people. Another thing too that I maybe my co-panelists could agree with is, you know, CMC, you're not always the smartest person in the room. You very quickly go to courses at CMC and find other people who are far smarter than you and really cause you to rise to the occasion, right? So taking those experiences and learning humility at CMC in that way, and then going forth into the Army, I lean heavily on my subordinates, on my non-commissioned officers, even some of my soldiers. You know, you have to walk into this position as a second lieutenant. Now I'm going to promote to first lieutenant in a week, and be prepared to not always have the best solution. I didn't have years of service like others did. So I constantly am asking my NCOs, show me how this thing works, or hey, what's your recommendation? And I don't necessarily always take their recommendations. Sometimes there's other exterior things in the mission that I have purview to and maybe they don't necessarily. it's just a matter of taking in other opinions and making decisions. But I mean, every time almost every time I head into a meeting where there's about to be a major decision made in terms of support for the Combat Aviation Brigade, I bring both of my NCOICs with me because I have a platoon sergeant and a maintenance control sergeant. So I bring them with me to major meetings, make sure that I have some advisory going on. And I'm surprised to walk into some of these meetings and find officers that don't bring their NCOs. So just sort of that humility, it seems, of understanding you're not the smartest person in the room, and that's really okay. But surrounding yourself with the smartest people is what's key.
Thanks. So you're all leaders in the military now. You're leading other people in service. CMC is about leadership and about educating leaders for the future and for the professions. How do you feel that your personal leadership style has either developed or changed over the years, especially as you changed from a graduate and a cadet into someone who's currently serving?
Someone else can go first this time.
Yeah, I saw you right there.
Okay, so I think for me, I don't think my leadership style necessarily changed. I know I had a lot of more overlap time at CMC with Ash specifically than John. And I remember having a conversation with Ash before about, your leadership style doesn't necessarily change from your MS3 and MS4 year. It just continues to develop. And so I definitely continue to resonate with that. I know that for me, it's always, mission first, but people make that mission. And so kind of going off of that sort of, very general leadership philosophy and making decisions is where I come from. But a big piece of this is, when you were in cadet leadership at ROTC, you're mostly working with other CMC students, you're working with other students across the battalion even too. And it was very much, if a cadet messed up, it was a point of learning, and they corrected the problem pretty quickly. I now, as a platoon leader with soldiers from all walks of life, sometimes it takes a little more tender loving care, if you will, for some of those soldiers. So I know that when these situations do arise, I really pride myself on knowing my platoon very well, down to kids' names, their wives, husbands' names, things that are going on in their lives, so that I can turn those contention points into leadership and learning points, and use as a development point for specifically soldiers of, if you want to take the next step, if you want me to rely on you like a non-commissioned officer, here are the steps you need to take. Let me know how I can resource you as your platoon leader, so that you can take those next steps and become a better person and a better soldier out of it.
Yeah, definitely. I like to consider myself a lifelong leader, although that's probably a little arrogant. But whether you're leading sports in high school or leading your peers, deciding where to go to lunch, or at CMC leading organizations, it's all generally pretty small, and it's all usually with peers, or at least people very similar to you. And then you enter into the active duty Army, and it's a very strict hierarchy. It's very different. And so for me, I learned to be a lot more trusting. Like, there's just not time in this job to earn trust. Like, if you come to me and you have a certain rank and you have a certain position, I expect you to go do the job. Like, I don't have time to be concerned about it. Especially like me, I'm a scout. So I'm going to send someone 5 kilometers over that hill. I'm not going to see them. And I just have to expect them to answer the questions, engage and destroy the enemy, and get the job done, while I'm doing the same thing 5 kilometers to the east. So I'm definitely a lot more trusting, just because I don't think that's something you can do in the Army. And I think I've been pleasantly surprised time and time again with when you give them that inherent trust and just kind of lay that out with the people that step up to the plate that I probably would have been riding on top of otherwise.
Yeah, very similar to what they said. At CMC, I felt like I was kind of a very direct leader. In RTC, you're really being evaluated on your direct leadership often, how well you lead a few soldiers through tasks and how well you do. But when you become a platoon leader, that gets flipped on its head. You're no longer being evaluated as you, the individual. your group of soldiers is being evaluated. So it's not enough to just be a good leader in charge of a few things. You're now a leader of leaders. So I've kind of tried to change my leadership style as to develop leaders, because oftentimes you're not there to make decisions. It's a 22-year-old leader in charge of 6 19-year-olds, like Ash said, that are very far away, that your success or failure depends on. And you at that very moment have no control over them or what they're doing. So you really have to develop them in training and teach them how to lead and make them successful. And that makes you successful. So building leaders has to be a leadership style that people, that cadets and lieutenants develop, and not just being a direct leader.
If each of you could share an experience in your leadership journey where things didn't go as planned and how you pivoted and what was the outcome. So think about the last, 1.5 or 3 or 4 years. What didn't go well and how were you able to handle that and what was the outcome?
I can jump on that one. So it's an integral lesson of the Army, and it's taught in ROTC and then again in your basic officers course, because you have to balance being a leader and remaining effective in the fight. And we do that really well in ROTC, right? Because on one hand, as a leader, you're going to be the last one to go to sleep. You're going to be the first one to wake up. That's just what you do. But when you're doing sustained operation over weeks, months, right, you have to find that downtime to take care of yourself so that you can continue making good decisions and be an effective leader. And while I think we did that in the field very well, I ran into a portion like last May. One of my peers, his father died unexpectedly in a car crash. So he went home on emergency leave. So I was filling in for his position as executive officer, as well as mine, the senior platoon leader. During the middle of a change of command, which for the veterans and current service members, you guys know how meticulous that can be. But I was basically running the troop, doing a change of command, and leading a platoon at the same time. And not in the field, but in a garrison environment. I think I hit leader burnout. And so I really had to learn how to restructure a lot of my personal life off the clock so that I could come to work every day prepared to continue fighting. So I think that's like the biggest pivot for me, is that you can't just, is that it's kind of a whole life thing that you need to do. You need to take care of yourself on the weekend and prepare yourself for the week, not by doing more work, but de-stressing, figuring out what you need to do. And so there, yeah, that's how I've pivoted my leadership recently.
I think for me, so a little bit different to John and Ash's experience joining and commissioning into the Army. I commissioned and showed up on island quite literally 2-3 months before the coronavirus pandemic hit. So I took a platoon. I was starting to understand op tempos for being in an active duty unit and the like. Also on top of that, as Ash referenced, being a part of sustainment operations in an active duty environment, which for the veterans here as well, sustainment never stops, quite literally never stops. And I learned that during this pandemic as well. So a plan that I'd made going into coronavirus, no one knew how large and how completely life-altering this event was about to be. And at the time we thought, well, okay, well, this seemed, we don't know how long this is going to take. We still were in the mindset that life will go back to normal at some point in the near future. And so I had to take a platoon of, at the time, around closer to 60 individuals, split them in half to work shift work, because we couldn't all just go home and work from our computers. I had soldiers who had to continue to maintain a fleet of equipment for 2,400 pieces of equipment to be exact, for an entire battalion should in the event that we have to go to war. So, had to keep about 50% of those personnel on at any given point in time. And at that time, I chose to keep my, starting quarterbacks, I guess to speak, for that 50% to keep working. And so we said, okay, we'll be at this for a few weeks. We'll comp them on the back end, but we need our heavy hitters in the motor pool and in the SSA and in the shops and everything to really drive the machine, since we can't get everyone in and maintain 6 feet social distancing, maintain that cleanliness and the like. And then it was 3 months later and it still wasn't slowing down. And I quickly was burning out my personnel. So then we had to reorient into a different plan for shift work to bring the 100% back in, but at different shift work. I know that I have Professor Ta, who's on the line now, and I actually spoke a lot to Professor Ta during those months when I was really struggling to make these decisions and try to grapple with the challenges around us, as everyone was. But at the same time, and again, the veterans and the officers in the room can attest to this, you're not just grappling with the changes of your own life and your family and friends, you're grappling with the changes of, for me at the time, those 58 lives that I was responsible for, as well as their families and their training, and continuing to get after the mission of the Aviation Support Battalion. So that was a huge learning opportunity. And I'm grateful for it, but at the same time, it was a very difficult and unusual, unseen challenge to taking on a platoon at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah, I think challenges are an integral part is growing as a leader. And as someone who's failed a lot of challenges, I can tell you that failure is often an overlooked tool that should be used to develop leaders. So with the proper reflection and retraining, a one-time failure, I think, can actually be more beneficial to teams and individuals and soldiers and leaders, really, than maybe a one-time success. For example, about 2 years ago, I was down at Fort Polk for a training exercise, very high level training exercise. You know, evaluations and careers are kind of made or broke on these kind of training exercises. And I won't go into all the details, but we were failing our part of the exercise, which was an extremely important part of it. So as a leader, you know, if it was easy, you wouldn't need a leader. Anyone could do it. But the Army trains these young ROTC cadets and young lieutenants, spends a lot of money on them, a lot of time on them to train them and put them in situations so that they're prepared to handle these difficult decisions. And long story short, as a leader, you got to get down there at the point of friction, be the calm and confident leader that knows their equipment, that knows what's going on, and just go down the line and find the difficult problems and the difficult challenges that your soldiers are facing and work with them to solve it. And once you do that, you'll solve a lot of the overall problems and overcome a lot of the failures that you need to overcome as a team. So my advice to you guys would be to look at failure as an opportunity for growth. Sometimes the failure in a training environment is the exact kind of training that you need, because if it goes smooth in training, you just never think about it again. You know, oh, we did that, we're good at it. But if you fail and you have to work through every single part of the training to get the mission right, then you know every single part in and out. So as a leader, it's your job to be there for the failures and to turn your failures into successes.
Thanks. John and Ash, Lindsay discussed a little bit about how the pandemic is affecting her work. If you could maybe go a little bit more into detail about how the pandemic is affecting what you two are doing, I think we'd really enjoy hearing it. And Ash, I know you're in Germany, which is going into a second lockdown. So any insight you have there would be great. I'm sure everyone would like to hear.
Well, we're still training. The rest of my unit's actually in the field right now. So we actually just got back from major exercise. We went and deployed an entire battalion to the Republic of Georgia. We went about 30 kilometers west of the Russian border, and we blew up a lot of things to make a point, is basically what we did in the strategic sense. So yeah, it's a huge logistical challenge. the Army has largely solved it here. You do your 14-day quarantine, you take 2 COVID tests. If they both come back negative, you're now part of a COVID bubble, and you're not allowed to break that bubble. So you can't talk, hang out with anybody else. As long as you're in that same group of people and you're locked down in your house when you're not on duty, then you're considered good. And we went there, came back, no positive test results. I got to go to a fun little follow-on mission and hang out in the Port of Constanta for a few weeks and help download equipment, which again, challenging with the COVID restrictions, but that's kind of how they're handling it here. So we're continuing operations for sure. We haven't slowed down, at least not in 2CR.
Yeah, back when the coronavirus first hit, I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. And for those of you that don't know, the 82nd's mission is to be anywhere in the world in 18 to 96 hours to respond to international emergencies. So obviously, you can't slow down. There's no stopping that mission because, you know, the nation's depending on this division to be anywhere. So we did slow down for a couple weeks to kind of just get a handle on what was really going on. But then we had to be kind of the first government institutions to be instituting safety measures. And there was ups and downs, there's hiccups, and it's never easy to confront something that there is no manual for, that there's no textbook for. So that was a big challenge as a leader, is how do you get back to the ability to get a lot of people together and send them across the world. And we're still kind of figuring it out. It's not easy, but it's a bringing a lot of expert in, which is what you have to do as a leader, and make tough decisions. And now as a recruiting officer, we're faced with the different challenges. How do we recruit high school students when high schools aren't open? So we've had to resort to social media, face-to-face prospecting when possible. But it's a new challenge, and you really like Lindsay had said earlier, you got to rely on the people under you. You got to bring their good ideas to the forefront and, allow them to be leaders too.
Great, thanks, John. Let's look at something that's been surprising to you. What do you three feel has been the most surprising or difficult part of your service experience? Something that maybe ROTC didn't prepare you for, or CMC didn't prepare you for?
I'm taking notes, don't worry.
So I think we've touched on it a lot here, and we talk about how there's such a diverse range of opinions on the Claremont campuses. But honestly, what I was surprised about was you're going from an environment surrounded by incredibly ambitious, incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent peers to the Army, where I'm one platoon leader, I'm one officer, and I have 35 enlisted soldiers under me. And some of them are smarter than me. Some of them have more degrees than I do, absolutely. But, I would be sending out texts or emails, and my squad leaders would be like, "Sir, I don't know what that word means. Like, what are you talking about? I don't understand what I'm supposed to do." The driver on my truck, like, "Hey, I need you to go here and then do that." And so learning how to slow down, do things slower, but more deliberately. That was, I think, the biggest culture shock. Because even in RTC, you're slinging words across the radio. Everyone's keeping up. It's no big deal. You're doing your little squad tactics. It's fine. But teaching the fundamentals to freshly enlisted soldiers is a different problem set. And if you think that there's unique ideas among the 5 Cs, there's absolutely some very unique ideas that some diverse individuals across the states will bring to your attention. And, "Sir, did you see this?" and show you some crazy article on their phone. But I love every single one of them. And like I said, also a ton of them way smarter than me as well. So this is not me disparaging them at all.
I think.
Oh, sorry, John. Nope, John, take it away.
All right.
Sure, you got it.
Sorry. Probably one of the most difficult things for my transition as like a college student to an officer was kind of figuring out how to manage yourself, manage your stress, and really find a way to recharge. When you're a student at CMC, like everything's planned out for you. There's events, their socials, their athletic competitions. There's just so much around you to really immerse yourself in. And then when you become, you know, a real adult or an officer in the Army, you have to make all those things yourself. So if you don't make an effort to make friends, if you don't plan activities, if you don't take time for your own happiness and fulfillment, then those things just don't happen. And you can burn out really quickly. So one of the most surprising things or difficult things was kind of learning to challenge, learning to take care of myself. And, you know, when I was in the cadet shoes, I would have just thought this didn't apply to me because, you know, I'm a cool guy and I don't need to do that. But my advice would be to you guys, like, figure out how to recharge, pick up new hobbies, like learn an instrument, do yoga, find a way to take care of yourself. Because if you're not there, if you yourself aren't okay, how are you going to be able to take care of soldiers?
So John basically took the words out of my mouth, so to speak. Definitely. I mean, I guess another way to look at this, and Colonel Hayden, I mean, it was discussed definitely at ROTC, but I don't know how to necessarily teach this beyond having cadets maybe shadow platoon leaders. I know CTLT was kind of shut down with COVID-19. For those of you on the line too, CTLT was a program where, so it was senior cadets could go and shadow a platoon leader to get some idea of active duty life. So the adjustment to active duty life to that end has been dramatic. It's weird because it's not necessarily the most mentally challenging thing all the time, as opposed to being in CMC coursework. But you are kept up all hours. You're worked every day. This is my first day off in 3 weeks. My parents can attest to that. I've barely spoken to them, unfortunately, but it's just a lot of work, and you become this job to some degree. So definitely finding ways to embed that time for yourself to recharge, to make sure you're healthy, you know, you're still paying all your bills on time, you're still functioning as an adult. It's all part of the learning curve. And I don't think you can really teach that until you really get to this position. It's your own challenges are going to make you a better leader anyway. But another thing too is when you take a platoon, you know, it's different from teaching cadets. Like, hey cadet, you know, you need to focus on your grades. Let me get you in touch with the tutor, yada yada. This time now I have soldiers who are going through divorces and they're working on who's going to get the kids, and I have another soldier with an alcohol problem, and there's just it's a litany of issues. And I wish I could say that it's not out far stretching, but it really is, because this life is extremely challenging and very stressful for everyone in it. So coming in at 23 years old as a recent college graduate, having never experienced any of these problems before on my own personal level, that was a big jump to make too, to figure out how to lead and mentor individuals with these problems and make sure they got the resources they need, or if there was something that I could do to also assist them and support them.
Thank you all. We have 2 questions left before we end our program. The first one, we're going to kind of look to the future, and the second one, we're going to look to our current students. And this one, I would love to hear your thoughts, Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, as well. What do you feel is the biggest challenge facing military leaders today?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You know, there are multiple. I mean, today right in front of our faces, obviously, is COVID, right? And John touched upon it. Being a recruiter in a COVID-informed environment is extremely difficult. Being a PMS in a COVID-informed environment, teaching all of my curriculum over Zoom and maybe having in-person training events once every 2-3 weeks. That's a pretty big challenge. But I'll also tell you that, and I taught a class a couple of weeks ago, actually on election day, and I planned it that way on purpose, and it was on civil-military relations. And I think that's the biggest gap that we have right now in our society, is closing that civil-military relations gap. And I don't mean, you know, the sort of the friction or conflict or not that may occur between, you know, senior military leaders and our politicians. What I really mean is that connection, that connective tissue between the civilian society and the military as a profession, right? And a lot of that, I could go on for hours about, you know, why that disconnect exists. But, you know, this is the reason why I jumped at this opportunity to provide remarks and be a part of this discussion is because I think it's very important. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have right now as a military in our society is to reconnect with our society.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That's you know, Colonel Hayden's excellent analysis from like the top level. I'll kind of hit it from the bottom level. For initial lieutenants, your biggest problem, your biggest challenge is going to be mission overextension. And kind of what I mean by mission overextension is that in today's conflicts, there's so many problems out there. There's so many ways that you're expected to fight. And there's a few amount of units that can fight all those problems. So what you end up doing is, as a platoon leader, you're going to be given 12 missions that you have to be experts at. For example, like as a platoon leader, I had 30 engineer soldiers, and their job was to be anywhere in the world in 18 to 96 hours. They had to be good at parachute operations, clearing routes of explosive hazards, breaching minefields, urban breaching, underwater breaching, subterranean breaching, and a bunch of other things. I could go on for a few minutes about all the things they had to be really good at because their lives depended on it. You know, and as a leader, you're not going to have to just know all of these tasks that they have to do. You're going to have to know all the tasks of all the people around you, because you're expected to fill in for the commander when he has a problem or if he can't be there. And so then you'll quickly find that the number of tasks and that you have to complete takes more time to train on than there are days in the year. So your biggest challenge as a leader is going to be identifying what are the most important things that I need to train my soldiers on so that they'll be successful and survive the next war. And I wish there was some answer that I could give you and say, well, obviously just do this. But it's a really complicated answer, and it's an answer that you're going to have to figure out as the platoon leader in your organization. So just be mindful of that. And that's why the Army has invested so much education and time and training into you.
Yeah. I think mine's going to be in the same thread. So believe it or not, I mean, our active combat zones are drawing down, or at least our presence there is not very large anymore. And we do have a change of administration coming on. And, you know, Clausewitz believes that war is just a continuation of policy by other means, and that the military is an instrument as well. And we've done this before, right? The Army expands and closes and expands and closes after every major conflict. But the point is, at the end of the day, the American taxpayers and the people that give us this money for our funding want to know where it's going and why. And so then we become really beholden to these metrics, right? Like John said, he has 30 tasks to train. Well, how do you measure that? How do you measure being good at route clearance? Is it better for one platoon that goes faster or worse? And so the Army will tie metrics into your training evaluations, which on one hand makes sense, right? Did you meet the mission standard? Did you make it on time? But like I said, we feel the pressure, which becomes pressure on the junior officers as well, to make slides green, right? Why is the slide red? We're giving all this money all this time. How can you not have done this yet? So I think that that's going to be one of our biggest challenges as the Army continues either in its present form or in a form it may turn into throughout the next 4 years. I think there's going to be a return to this need for quantifiable metrics, when maybe that's not always the best way to measure readiness. And there's been tons of reports, you know, you can read Lying to Ourselves back in 2015 that took this on, much better written and coherent than I can repeat it today. But how leaders deal with it in the Army, right? Having 100 things to do, but no longer the funding or the time or the resources to make it happen, and what is acceptable. what is an acceptable level of readiness? Because that's our current mission, is to be ready for the next conflict. And so what does that look like? How do we measure it? And then how do we get there? Because we are receiving your tax money to do it. And so we owe that to the American public to provide that readiness.
So I'm glad that Ash brought up readiness. So my answer is similar in the thread of trying to achieve readiness given the changing world and the changing war environment, but also from the sustainment side of the house. So from my foxhole as a promoting first lieutenant, some of the things I'm seeing. So not only am I a platoon leader, but because I'm one of the very few logisticians in an aviation battalion, brigade, I'm constantly briefing at brigade level, meetings, talking. I work very closely with my battalion command team, which is very unheard of for a second lieutenant. So I've spent a lot of time both working on ground with my soldiers, but also being in the room when these decisions are being made on sustainment operations. And so something that I want to speak to a little bit on one of the bigger challenges that the military is facing right now is the adaptation gap. So it's something that is been studied in previous years, but is becoming an even larger conversation, both at the National Defense University, Army War College, and the like, of what is the gap between what we need to see as a force and how we react to our near peer threats. Most notably, the one that we discuss most over here at PACOM is China. And then as well too, where do we sit as a force now, how we read our doctrine, how we work on our doctrine, and then the reality of what does our equipment look like? Like what do our soldiers, what are they trained on? What do they know? What do they need to know? And are they going to be capable of making decisions in a complex environment, sometimes with a lack of guidance? For example, if the leaders are not there and they were told to accomplish a task that doesn't seem possible in the moment, but then therefore they can do this thing instead to adapt to the environment. And so that adaptation gap is something that we're really, I believe from my foxhole, struggling with. We're a very slow to change organization, which is for sometimes a good thing, sometimes not such a great thing. Specifically for the 25th ID, a lot of our equipment is very, very old. We sometimes struggle with budgeting issues. And a lot of that is because the 25th ID's mission set to defend the United States against, all enemies, foreign and domestic, and the Constitution and the like, has been focusing on PACOM areas, hasn't really been a topic of discussion for 40, 50 years. And now we're starting to rehash that with our near peer threats. So kind of trying to close that adaptation gap and modernize ourselves as a force and modernize our equipment, I believe is the biggest challenge that we face in sustainment operations for the Army today.
Last question for all of you. What advice would you give current CMC students in the ROTC program today?
I've been waiting for this question. For all the cadets listening, I was an extremely successful cadet. I'll just say what it is. I was in the top 10% nationally. I graduated as a distinguished military grad. I think on pure ML points, I was actually something in the 20s, like in the nation, because your job and location in the Army is based off of the order of merit list, which is based off of points. Game the system, right? You know what you need to do to get the right amount of points, to get the job that you want and the status that you want, whether that's active duty, National Guard, the location that you want. I got to go to Germany, which has been incredible, even with COVID. So you take the OML, look at it, see what's important, and tailor it to yourself. The same way that all your peers are looking to go to Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and so they know what that means. That means the junior year, they have to take an internship over here. That means the sophomore year, they need to be doing this over here with this person, right? The same way that everyone else is mapping out their career. Just because you know you're going Army at the end doesn't mean you shouldn't tailor your experience just as much. So I'd say take advantage of the opportunities at CMC, but always, that's all it is. They tell you exactly what they want. Go out there and give it to them.
So I agree with Ash insofar that if you're looking for a very specific job and branch within the Army, There is a lot that you could do for your OML, but at the end of the day, the Army's going to spread the talent however it wants to. So Ash, I respectfully disagree to this point. I would spend more time. I mean, for those of you who were very close to me and cadets who surrounded me specifically, I was very gung-ho specifically on becoming a military intelligence officer and going quick start into JSOC. And that did not happen considering the discussions that we're having here. I ended up becoming an ordnance officer, and I remember getting my branching from Colonel Doyle, and I literally looked at him and I was like, what is that branch? Like, I don't know what that branch does. So the biggest thing that I do not regret out of CMC ROTC and what I did at CMC was changing my course. I did everything that I wanted to do at CMC because of my passions, because I loved what I did. And I loved those 4 years and gained so much from those 4 years. On the back end, however, OML Order of Merit List did not work in my favor. And I ended up branching into a branch that I didn't know anything about. But as John referenced earlier, when out of the biggest failures come the biggest opportunities to grow. So I would say don't fight necessarily for a branch unless that's everything that you want more than anything in this world. To be quite honest, Ash's answers, John answers, my answers were roughly the same, if not exactly the same, a lot to these questions. Your job matters far less in the Army. You're going to be an officer at the end of the day. You're going to be a platoon leader. You'll make executive officer time, and then you'll move on to captain's career course. And from there, you might decide, maybe I want to pivot, maybe I want to try something a little bit different, because you'll start moving into jobs from there that are a little bit more distinct given the branch. So I would spend more time trying to decide on what you want your service to look like. I think for me, I always was kind of like, oh, no brainer. I want to go active duty because I actually want to go and do a job on the day-to-day basis that I trained to do through ROTC. And I didn't spend that much time considering it as much time as I considered my branching. And now I look back and I go, wow, did I really know what I signed up for? Like, oh my God, I work all the time. And then I have peers of mine as well. For example, Rafael Velasco, also class of 2019, who chose to go reserve and go work in other organizations and lead a civilian life. And we converse from time to time, and he has a very different service than I do. And it's just really what you want out of your service more than anything else. I've learned a lot through going into sustainment. I never really asked myself the question prior to getting here, what does it look like to deploy a force? What does it look like to put a force out on the forward line of troops and feed them, give them water, make sure they're consistent with their hygiene, they have medical services, they're fueled. Specifically for my mission set, how do we get Chinooks, Blackhawks, Apaches off the ground and returning to us safely? There's so much that goes into that isn't necessarily discussed in multiple settings. It's kind of one of those, I guess, less sexy topics, but when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, nothing can happen unless sustainment is there. So again, just to reiterate, I wouldn't spend so much time fighting for a branch. Your job at the end of the day is gonna be more or less the same as a lieutenant, but I'd spend time considering what your service looks like, because then when you get to the captain's career course, you can make that ultimate decision on whether or not you want to change what your service looks like. Maybe you want to go into JSOC, you want to go into civil affairs, maybe you want to go out for reserves, maybe it's time to go back to school and you're done with the Army as a whole, or maybe you really do want to VTIP for a branch that you look forward to serving in. But another thing too, I've talked to a lot to my peers as well about this. I haven't faced this quite too much yet, but my mentors have discussed a lot of your time as an officer, you're not in command. You only spend 18 months as a platoon leader, 18 months as a company commander. You'll eventually make your way back to battalion command if you stick it out and you make it through your boards and the like. But most of your time you're spent as a staff officer. So you need to consider what your service would look like should you become a staff officer as well. And I see Colonel Hayden smiling over in the corner, so I'm guessing he's going to jump onto this point too. But just know that you're going to have so much finite time with soldiers, and to consider what your service looks like as a staff officer, considering most of your time will be spent as a staff officer.
Well, I disagree with both of them. No, I'm just kidding. Great advice. And some great advice in the chat too. Go to the ATH talks because you'll miss them when they're gone. I think a good piece of advice to always keep in mind is that even though the Army seems like this giant leviathan that is constantly moving along and crushing people, remember that the Army is really a people business. And especially you as a young leader, make connections with the people around you, make connections with your sustainers, make connections with the other people that you work with outside of your unit, because those connections really determine how well you succeed. If I make the effort to get to know Lindsay every time during maintenance Monday in the motor pool, and my stuff's broken and Ash's stuff is broken, and both of our stuff needs to get fixed, she might be more inclined to help you out or help me out because you've made those connections. So I know CMC teaches you to make connections, but don't give that up. Make sure you're making connections as a leader and you're keeping people in mind first. Develop people and facilitate their success.
Thank you, John. Thank you also, Lindsay and Ash. Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, thank you for being here today as well. Well, maybe I'll direct a very last question to you because I know it's just after 1 and we need to conclude. But Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, what advice would you give to young officers?
Listen to your NCOs. Bottom line, Lindsay brought it up. You are going to be faced. ROTC, and especially Claremont McKenna ROTC, does a really, really good job of preparing you to lead, right? But what we can't do, and no source of commission can, unless it's OCS and you have some prior service, right? But no, what we can't do is prepare you to lead maintainers, and then prepare Ash to lead tankers, and then prepare John to lead engineers, right? I can't do that with all of my cadets, but what I can do is prepare you to lead. Okay, so when you get there, I've given you all the tools. Now you need to listen to the people around you and listen to your NCOs. As Lindsay was talking about all of that, look, soldiers are people and they have problems, right? NCOs are people and they have problems. Officers are people and we have problems, okay? Fortunately, they come to us with their problems. And like Lindsay said, you're 22, 23 years old and you're kind of like, okay, what do I do now? I immediately went to my platoon sergeant and said, hey, what do we do now? And so that is what I would tell cadets or young officers. If you want advice as a cadet, I tell you to go to class, okay? Thank you for this opportunity, Evan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Hayden, to the CMC community. Thank you, everyone who has served or who will serve. Have a wonderful Veterans Day. All of you deserve it.